do our group introductions. I hope everyone's remembered us, apart from me, a significant object with them. And then I've put together a presentation that I'd like to share with you. And while I'm presenting, I'd like you to, it's my ideas and thinking. It's not any particular expertise or authority. So I want you to, as I'm presenting, do take notes or think critically about what I'm saying, how it might apply to how you think about the world and the work you do, what you don't agree with, etc. And then after the break, we can decide. I've got 3 discussion activities that we can do if you want that kind of structured activity in response to this topic in the presentation, or we can have an open discussion or a bit of both. Okay? So I'll start. I'm really sorry I didn't bring the tiny shoes because they're so beautiful to hold, because they're about this size. So these shoes are special to me because they were given to me by my grandma, but I call her my nana. I don't know, do you have that word? Yeah. And I'll talk a bit more about my nana actually, but her and my granddad, they ran a hairdressing business and they were quite successful, and they used their money to go on holidays to Spain and a lot of the time. And so these were brought back from a holiday in Spain, and they came with one of those little dresses, like a flamenco dress. Mm-hmm. And as you can see, I wore those shoes until they were broken, which is a lot of wear if you think the little feet grow quite quickly. But there was something that my practical parents would think, well, stupid little girls in shoes with little heels. But I absolutely love them. So that's my significant object. And I think they're important to me as well, because as well as being the professional person I am, might like to describe myself as a feminist researcher. I do love to dance whenever I can. I also really like to garden, and as well as being a feminist researcher, I'm a mum, I'm a sister. I have two kids who are 21 and 17. And I live in Brighton on the south coast of the UK, but I'm actually from the northeast, from a town called Middlesbrough. If anyone follows football, they might have heard of Middlesbrough Football Club. So yeah, that's me. So, should we go around? And if you could all sort of briefly, in a few minutes, share your object and tell us a little bit about yourself. You look like you want to start, Daisy.
I don't have a lot here with me. So
Yeah.
This is a bit of a stretch.
No, that's good.
I bought a necklace that I've had for a few years.
Maybe as well, when we've spoken, we could put our objects there in the centre, like a little museum display, perhaps, for ourselves. Oh.
Necklace. I bought this in Camden Market, and I used to be quite superstitious about it. And I used to have to wear it every day because it's like drawing up the evil eye. So I wore it every single day because it kind of became a bit lucky. And then I wore it the day I failed my driving test. I wasn't actually that lucky. So now I just wear it when I go to my life.
Excellent. Oh. And do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, Daisy, as well?
Sure. I'm from the Isle of Wight in the UK. And I just finished my 3 years at Bournemouth University doing social anthropology.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Yeah. And why are you in Kosovo at the moment?
I came over to do a workshop at Michigan University, and now I'm doing placement with the history.
Nice. Excellent. Do you think that's all right? Are you people comfortable putting their special objects together? Maybe we can then take a nice photo of them all.
Yeah.
Without my
Yeah, you
shoe.
can just leave it.
Thank you. Thanks, Daisy.
Hi.
Can I say your name so I sort of learn it?
Yeah, it's Agnesa.
Agnesa.
Yeah. So I brought my very battered copy of The Secret History. It's by Donna Tartt. She's this American author. Basically, what the book is about this kid called Richard, and he gets like a scholarship to this like very fancy liberal arts college in Vermont where all the writers go and yeah whatever. And he's very infuriating. I hated him throughout the entire book, but unfortunately, I had to listen to him go on and on about the fact that he's like unimportant. And like, okay, I get it. I thought this was supposed to be fun, but anyway. And basically the entire book is about like how far are you willing to go in order to fit in with the group of people that you want to fit in. And he becomes sort of obsessed with this group called the Greek class because it's like these 4 boys, 1 girl, and basically what they do is that they're the only class that like learn ancient Greek, and they're very secretive, they're very like elite and stuff. It's also kind of like a commentary on like how like sort of like white elitism sort of like because one of the characters is very racist. Like literally I just flipped the page, slur, 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 and it's like wow, it's like 3 a.m. like bro, like and it was actually quite interesting to see how they unfold because they do kind of like turn against each other like by the end of the book. I just finished my 2nd year in sociology at the University of Pristina. Possibly planning on going like to another country for my master's, so we're just gunning for that. And actually the reason why this is kind of important to me is because me and my sister, we both read it at the same time, and we both like she was in her room and I was in my room when we both got to the end, and literally she opened her door and we were just looking at each other.
Oh, I love that.
And I literally all I did was and yeah, so
Thank you.
bonding thing.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Thank you. Can you put down? How about you, Anita?
Okay, I'm Anita Susuri. I work for Oral History since 2019 as a researcher, as an interviewer. I grew up in Belgrade, and after the end of the war, I came to Pristina. My family is originally from Brisbane. It's a city in the south part of Kosovo. Yes, that's why I looked at you. The south part of Kosovo. I was very attached to my grandparents. I'm the oldest granddaughter. Grandchild. And I had a special bond with my grandmother. Actually, she was the one who brought me up. My mother was very young when she was 20 when I was born. So my grandmother was like, I don't know, she brought me up, but she raised me, and she was always there to talk to me and give me advice. And she had, I think, 12 grandchildren. And every time during any holidays or special days, she would buy a gift for all of them. And by the end, because there was a lot of us, there was not a big gift, but something just to mark the day. So this is the last gift she gave me. Actually, it was Eid. It was 2020, and Eid is this Muslim holiday.
Eid. I see. Yeah. Eid. Yeah.
And she brought gifts for all of us kids, and my brother's girlfriend came to visit, and my grandmother called me at her room, and she said, "I don't have any gift for her. I don't know what to give to her." and I give you a good gift to her. And I said, that's okay, it's not a problem. It was like pajamas. I said, it's okay, you can give. But what should I give you? And she gave me one of her socks.
Oh, I love it. Oh, brilliant story.
Yeah, and then she died maybe after 2 weeks. And she passed away after 2 weeks. And after she passed away, some of her daughters, granddaughters, they took something to think of her. Yeah, I didn't take anything, but I said I will save this.
Nice.
I mean, it's starting to. It's not
Yeah.
a great quality, but I'm going to keep it somewhere safe until I can.
Excellent. Thank you.
I changed. Sorry, just to add this. Last year I moved to another apartment and to live with my partner. So I took some things with myself, and I have a lot of things in my family house, like a lot of memorabilia. But I took these to be there with me.
Oh, wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Andrei Vlasoli. I'm from Pristina. I'm also second year sociology student at University of Pristina. I wrote like very important book with myself. It has two meanings for me. The first one, I read this book at the very beginning of my 6th grade, like in 2015. This book like made me more passionate about history. And then it sends me throughout my academic journey, like to love more social sciences, to be more interested in social sciences. I think this book started everything,
Oh.
my courage. And the most important thing, it's also my gift from my nana, my grandmother. And
Should we just rename this workshop to our grandmas? Let's see.
She bought this for my birthday, and this book has a lot of history, anthropological perspective, also sociological perspective. And I remember grandmother used to say, "Hey Andy, come together, we will saw the old pictures there." Because she remembers all the towns. Oh, when I was a kid, I was playing there, near the river, with my friends. And I remembered all these memories like we had together. There is also an oral history with my grandfather in this book. And every year, till this year, we always stay together, watch the pictures, she commemorated the pictures. And unfortunately, she passed away 2 weeks ago. She had, when I saw her bed, the book was near, and today I was seeing the pictures, scrolling the pages, and I saw this paper. She has this, how to say, practice to put papers between the pages. And yeah, this is maybe the most important book, both for my academic journey, it inspired me so much, and both for my grandmother, yeah.
Thank you. Amazing. Thank you, Andy.
Hi everyone, my name is Jatra, and I brought this jewelry box. At least I use it for that. I just put my rings and earrings and whatnot. And I sort of received this by accident a few years ago when kind of COVID was hitting off. I was in high school, but I was studying in Italy. It was kind of like an international boarding school situation. But we had to leave the school for just very abruptly within 42 hours. And they told us, you're gonna come back in 2 weeks, so pack lightly. And one of my friends, Siobhan, she's from Palestine. She forgot this, and she was like, "Can you take it for me, and then you can return it to me when we see each other after 2 weeks." Little did we know that we wouldn't return, and I haven't seen her ever since. But yeah, I think I was wondering, I was thinking about what should I bring here today. So with what is going on in Palestine, my friend is on my mind a lot. So, and this reminds me of her. So yeah.
Are you in touch with your friend?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And Lata, tell us a little bit about what you're doing at the moment. You told me earlier you've just graduated
Yeah.
from Colorado.
I just graduated from Colorado College. I studied feminist and gender studies. But yeah, I just graduated in May, and I'm just hanging around, I guess. Enjoy it.
Yeah. Hi, thank you.
I'm Donya. I'm a research assistant at the Oral History Initiative. So what I brought today is actually 2 objects, so I got them together. This is like an ancient CD player, and this is the first album I ever owned. It's Shakira's Laundry Service. So after the war, my dad used to be a translator for KFOR. It's a special unit by NATO, like a peacekeeping unit, yeah. And they would bring us gifts, and this is one of the gifts they brought. And as a child, I would actually spend a lot of time listening to this album and then other albums that I got. But for me, it was like sort of a meditation session. Maybe not meditation, I would just spend a lot of time world building in my head. And it was like a way of escapism. And later on, for a long time during my life, this specific world building, this specific world that I built specifically by listening to music has been a means of survival for me, and this is what started it. So yeah, this is like my special
Thank you.
project.
Hi. So maybe just to continue what Shakira was doing, I think this is what we all know the picture of.
Yeah.
These are so women and men and children when they fled from Kosovo during the war. This is a very random magazine I found in Turkey, in Istanbul. It was in one of the vintage bookshops. So this just fell in my hand. So of course I had to take it. So this is for me. It's, as much as it's personal to everyone, it's to me as well. But also I've chosen it today, especially because yesterday was the 25th year of the liberation of Kosovo, and I thought it would be a good way to kind of commemorate that. It really, in my head, it also makes sense with what Yota said about Palestinian women fleeing, and special days like this are sometimes sensitive to people even 25 years after the liberation, but also to conflicts happening now, to genocides happening now. Unfortunately, I didn't drop my kufia, I should have done that. But this is kind of something that I have it in my home for at least 2 years now, and it always reminds me of kind of what really happened, and it reminds you of sort of milestones of not just personal families, but contextual national milestones that we have to kind of not forget. Yeah.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Amalia. I'm actually, I think you are not from Kosovo, I'm also not from Kosovo, I'm from Albania. I just wanted to say that because since you mentioned like a very special day in the histories of the family, I don't have that history with Kosovo, but I do live here since 3 years. So what I brought today is this. As you can see, it's a little rose. I chose this because it's just an object. It's not, it doesn't have such a function, you know, it's not like a book you can read or something you can put in jewelry into or something. It's just decoration, let's say. And I got this very recently at my uncle's wife's 60th birthday. She brought gifts for everybody, and actually they emigrated to Italy when they were really young, at 20 years old. After communism ended in Albania, they just went to Italy. So they kind of built their whole life there away from us, away from their whole family. So they never had a wedding. So she wanted to do her 60th birthday like a big birthday. She flew everybody out, you know, like 10 people in my family. We've never done this as a family, so it was really interesting for me. And yeah, it kind of also, in that context, makes me think of all of us, like Albanians who are not where we were born in, or like we emigrate and we move around so much, and histories of families who are kind of, I have this with myself as well. I'm from Tirana, I live in Pristina, I go back, I go forth, I miss everybody here, I miss everybody there. So for me, this reminds me of her in the sense that she, you know, kind of wants to keep this bond, even though we're like a sea away. She's like, no, everybody fly out for my birthday and make a big party, give you all gifts. So yeah, this was what it means for me.
Did you say it was your auntie or your grandma?
It's my uncle's wife, so
Uncle's
my
wife.
aunt.
I don't know whether any of you have used this technique in your interviews or your research, but
I mean,
obviously, yeah.
I mean, with Chandler, who's the Fulbright
Yes.
student that I'm working for, I think sort of in a way we are trying to give a little bit more importance on the trauma that like the destruction of something material
Yes.
can bring. Because I think that we actually both disagreed with one of my anthropology professors, because he kind of ties trauma more into like the people that you can lose, or just the possibility of losing people. But then we're kind of sort of looking to counter that, like okay, like also losing people is very traumatic, but also losing the house that you were like raised in, that you got married in, or like just losing everything in there, like pictures or like your dresses or just clothes that you really like, they can also be like very traumatic. And I also think it kind of puts things in like a deeper perspective when you see something that used to belong to somebody who's like no longer alive, I think.
And I think just objects are safe things for somebody to talk about. It takes a bit of pressure off in an interview situation, rather than asking somebody about them and their feelings. We can still learn about them and their feelings, but through an object. Or like you say, I mean, you talked about the photographs, and yeah, like photo elicitation, we might call it, but you know, we've all done that in our own families. I've done it with an elderly neighbour. You know, looking at a photo and talking around the photo can be a great place to engage. Similarly with objects, or in your case, like in places and at particular sites. I always remember in my hometown of Middlesbrough, they knocked down the old Victorian swimming pool. Like, why they do that, I don't know. But you could see that all around the perimeter, when that was happening, were people reminiscing about that place and what it meant to be. So I just think this is a really nice activity you can always do in a group context with people. It's a nice way of introducing people, that they can bring themselves in a way they want to and share a part of themselves that they want to. But it's also something that you can think about in your interviews, and you may know people like talking about clothes, for example, and people, you might not have that dress in front of you, but it could still be a focus in the interview to help take somebody back in time, these sort of like. So thank you very much for joining in that introduction, and also thank you very much for having me today and inviting me here, Jutta. It is my first time in Kosovo. I have to admit I don't know a lot about Kosovo. Learning little bits about your history. When I walked in the hotel, the guy in the hotel told, I guess because it's the 25th anniversary, it was all about Tony Blair. And I was like, okay, yeah, I am in a real live context here, because my first interaction is about this, about the conflict and the relationship with the UK during that. So thank you, and yeah, I guess I bring something from my experience, but there's a lot of gaps in my knowledge, and I really look forward to learning from you today as well. So this is a sort of the plan for the next, I don't really know how long this presentation will take. I think it might take 40 minutes, it might take an hour. So I want to start by talking a little bit about oral history and me, so you know where I come from and where my ideas and thinking come from. We'll look a little bit about what it actually means. You know, when you start using these words, collaborative and praxis, I think you have to own them and think about why you're using them. I want to share with you why I think it's important to talk about it, even though it might feel like a sort of straightforward aspect of the work we do. And I'm sure as well, you know, it's something that all of you do and you will have expertise in. And so again, like if things I'm saying are really obvious to you, just use the space to dwell a little bit more deeper and think about collaboration in the way that makes sense to you. I'll talk about where the roots of the sort of ideas and my thinking around collaboration. I should also say I don't really consider myself to be an academic. I'm more of a practitioner who has had 4 years in academia, struggling a little bit with that person being in academia. I did an undergraduate degree in anthropology at Edinburgh, but they give you a master's because you study for 4 years. But I haven't been back to university. I've thought about doing a PhD, but life gets in the way. I'm the main breadwinner for my family, and I haven't felt that I've been able to afford to take that time to do a PhD. But I have done lots of research, but not all of it academic. And then, talk a little bit about power, and what I think thinking about feminist leadership can help us in terms of doing better collaborative work. So here we go. Here's my nana. That photo's not come out very well, that big, sorry, but it's an old photo. So this is my nana, and that's her in 2011, I worked out, when she was 90. And she passed away in 2017. So the reason I want to start by talking about her is because she's really the reason that I got into oral history. Because when I was 16 at school, we got asked to do this local history project. And lots of people, I think the expectation was that you would like do a building or a monument, like a church or an old fort or something like that. And I was like, I want to do my nana, right? Like, she's local because she's from the northeast of England, and she's pretty historical given her age, and I've heard her talking about her past. And they were like, oh, okay. So we agreed on a title which was like growing up in the 1920s in Burnhope. So Burnhope was a coal mining village in the northeast of England. I hadn't heard of oral history at the age of 16, but I had an inclination that it would be a good idea to spend a weekend with her and her sister and record them on, not a CD player, a really old tape recorder, we're going back a generation, talking about their childhood in this quite rural mining community in the northeast of England. And then what we did, which is also, I learned later, is a participatory research technique. People might even call it a transect walk. We went back to the village and we walked around. And so then they kind of, I guess what we were talking about, we were going to places and they were like, oh, remember when we were telling you about the park? Well, that's the park, and that's where so-and-so was found in the pond. And then we bumped into Daisy Knowles in the centre, who was the butcher's wife. So, funnily enough, I then decided to study anthropology at Edinburgh. And while I was at Edinburgh, I think it's quite irresponsible, but they invited us to go out and do field work. It's like these kind of young, bright, white 20-year-olds. And my mum was working at the time with the Pakistani community in Middlesbrough. And so I had a bit of an urge to go to Pakistan. And I ended up, the pictures, I'm sorry, they're much better they are quite sharp on here. They're just not sharp on there. So I went to northern Pakistan and spent some time interviewing women about the relationship between I looked looking at the relationship between women, tourism, and culture. I started with a translator, doing interviews and taking notes, and then I met a proper anthropologist who was using a tape recorder, and she's like, "Why are you not taping your interviews?" And I'm like, "I think people might feel awkward." And she's like, "It's you who feels awkward. Get the tape recorder out. It'll be okay." And of course, it was. It was a good lesson. And then when I graduated, I had the opportunity to go back to northern Pakistan, and I worked as a consultant for two big NGOs, and my role was really doing participatory research. I don't know if anybody's heard of participatory rural appraisal. So it's sort of like series of quite visual techniques, like doing ranking on the ground or drawing maps, a whole kind of toolkit of research activities which would be, not like a survey, not interacting with people in a survey, but trying to get them engaged in creating knowledge about their place. And at the end of my time there, I dreamed up this fantasy project called Women on the Highway, because this is where I did my sort of dissertation, this area called Hunza, and this was where I went back and worked in Gilgit. And this road is called the Karakoram Highway, and it passes through different ethnic groups, different strands of Islam. We have Ismaili Muslims, Shia Muslims, Sunni Muslims, different language groups. And I wanted to do this collaborative oral history project with the former translator, interviewing different women who lived along the highway. And I wrote a funding proposal. It was the first funding proposal I wrote. It was shit, so it didn't get funded. But something had there was a little spark in my head, I guess, about working in that way. And when I returned to the UK, I saw a job that was an oral testimony program officer. And I read the brief and I was like, this is kind of it. This is using some of the ideas around participatory research and sort of principles and practice of oral history in the context of international development. So I joined the PANOS oral testimony program, and I worked there from 1999 to 2013. It was set up by someone called Olivia Bennett, who founded it in the 90s. One of the first, let's just grab the book, the first project that she sort of initiated was this one, Women in Conflict project. So she partnered with women's organisations across 11 countries, and the way the projects work would we always support, work with civil society organisations and support groups of interviewers who might be from a community or work closely with a community to be the ones who do the interviewing. And then we work with that group to support them with funding and some technical support if they needed it, to work with the resulting interviews and produce outputs for local and national audiences. And we'd work with the international ones for international audiences. These are some of the themes we worked on. This is one of my favourite photographs. If anybody has seen the Oral History Reader, the latest edition, it's on the front cover of that, which I consider a bit of a win because it's two Muslim women doing oral history. And I think oral history, we still hear a lot about the men in oral history. They still kind of dominate some of the experts we cite. So I'm delighted that photo is on the front cover of the Oral History Reader. And this is Husn Bibi, and she's interviewing the late Russian Numa in 2000 in a remote community called Shimshal, where we did one of the PANOS projects. And so, like I say, we supported communities to produce local language booklets. I think that booklet was the first book-written version of the language in Mount Elgon in Kenya, done theatre performances, radio work, and then we worked with the international, with the English translations for international audiences. PANOS closed in 2013, and I couldn't really bear to see the archive of 1,300 testimonies, but I guess at the time I didn't think of the archive as them. It was also just like the knowledge and relationships that I'd built up with people. So I set up a community interest company, mainly so I could be the custodian of that archive and have the ownership transferred to me, or the custodianship. And I thought I'd go on and like fundraise for oral testimony projects. That didn't work out. Fundraising's not my thing. I ended up doing a lot of interesting consultancy work, doing participatory research for NGOs. And this ended up being a big sort of piece of portfolio of work that I was involved in. And for me, it links very closely to all of the oral testimony work. Because the oral testimony work was all about that aspect of oral history, about trying to bring unheard voices into the discourse and being taken seriously. So I don't know, some of you may be familiar with the debate around poverty porn, around fundraising imagery, about how we represent people living in the global south, and there's been a lot of critique around that. Bewildering to me is the fact that all of that debate on representation doesn't include the ideas of people who are represented, kind of a glaring gap. So in this piece of research for Save the Children, we did that. We went and talked to people who were featured in Save the Children's imagery about how they felt about it. And that led to changes in the guidelines across the NGO sector. So I'm nearly done with the intro. Then I joined a university project, partly because when you're employed, you get a salary every month, which is amazing. So when you're kind of working as a freelancer or like kind of trying to do your own projects, you know, sometimes you pace off 1 day a month, sometimes 2 days a month. So I joined Living Deltas and back in 2020. And within the Living Deltas project, so I guess this is my most recent piece of collaborative research, I've worked with teams of young researchers in Vietnam and Bangladesh on a piece of intergenerational research around people's experiences of environmental change. We started in 2021, you couldn't travel. So previously in Panos projects, we'd run a workshop in person, and so because of COVID, we had to think about, that's a great place to collaborate, right? You spend 5 days with people face to face, you do a workshop, you talk in the evenings. But we had to switch to sort of remote working remotely. And I think there's lots of advantages to that actually, because we had a longer term relationship. So these researchers used oral history, but they also used visual methods such as participatory photography, you might be familiar with, and mapping. And so I think what's also important to say is that you can see that I am often mostly not the interviewer. And I think when we talk about collaboration in oral history, we often do there's been a lot of focus and interest in the interview itself, the interview encounter and the relationships within that moment and the power within that. And I always work to support and work with groups of interviewers who are closer to the community where the research is taking place rather than myself. And just one last thing about this project in terms of working collaboratively. One of the things I've done towards the end of the project is develop a relationship with NGOs Health Page International and the youth NGO Restless Development to do a piece of work on uniting generations for climate action. So we've used the research idea, which was interviewing older and younger people about their experiences of environmental change, and thought about what would that look like if we try and do it in a development space and move it more towards dialogue and action. Okay. I feel like I've spoken for a long time. Do you want to ask any questions? I'm sure.
Yes.
Right, yeah. Is that good? Yeah, it's probably good to have a little pause before we move on to the content of the presentation.
Okay, maybe just to kind of, if you feel that it would be nice, maybe just to touch upon participatory action approach and participatory photography. Maybe just to elaborate a bit, and how exactly you used it, especially in the climate change project. How did you use the participatory action approach?
Okay. Yeah.
How did it start? How many researchers were there? What were kind of responsibilities? How did you manage to work with that dynamic?
It depends how you're working, but I think repeat visits are a really kind of critical part of developing good relationships with communities, because the first time those researchers arrived, maybe we have to remember community members what is this interview about? Why are you here? What are you interested in? And it's through a process of being there and doing that people understand what's expected of them and how they can contribute. So I think repeat visits means that not only do your group of researchers feel more confident and knowledgeable about the place and can refine their research questions, but the people who are there feel more comfortable about taking on that role of research participants, because that is a role we're expecting them to play. But then, it was on the third visit we brought younger and older people together to do a series of sort of focus groups around some of the photographs that have been taken as well by the researchers, but also by the younger people. I think actually in the climate change project we tried to do too much. I think it was too many methods. I think for the team of researchers becoming kind of masters or mistresses of oral history, participatory photography and mapping was a lot. But generally, I love participatory photography. Who else has used that in their work?
How does that work?
So I guess it's about giving a group of people who you might normally see as a research participant a camera, or asking them to use their phone. You need to think about ethics and confidentiality and all of that. And as thinking about what you might use as a prompt for them to take a photograph of, in terms of something that might be important to them about the issue that you're interested in. And then when people come back with those photographs, you ask them to caption those photographs, and that becomes a source of data, if you like. So in one of the early projects we did with Save the Children about image making, remember I showed you? So we were doing the research in a slum area of Delhi, and we were asking people who'd been in their photos about the experience of being photographed, etc. And then we gave a group of women cameras and said, right, you go, and we're going to come back in a week. In that week, you take photographs of how you want your community to be presented to the world. And no surprise to me at all, but women came back with photographs of their children, smartly dressed, ready for school, in clean clothes and beautiful hair, and they said, look, these photos taken by outsiders of the rubbish dumps and dirty children. That is just one side of the story. We are managing to, in this small environment, chaotic environment where we live, we have order and we kind of look after our children well and they go to school. So I guess it's an opportunity for people. You can use it in different ways, but it can be an opportunity for people to represent themselves. My sister did a project with young refugees in the UK, and I think she said, as the organising institute, they thought all the photographs would be about the refugee experience. And some of the young people were like, why would I want to talk about that? I just want to be like a young person in this place. My photographs are going to be about my music, or more about maybe this idea of world building that you talked about. So I think it's, and when we talk about collaboration and handing over power, it's a way to sort of hand over power. And you end up with good outputs for communication purposes as well, using participatory photography. Any other questions about what I've spoken about so far?
So when you mentioned that when you like did the interview about with your grandmother or your nana,
Yes.
how life was in the 1920s, how do you think that your methods, obviously in the beginning, like obviously you're like first timer and things change over time, but what do you think, sort of like, how do you think your method, like what's a big change in your method that you've noticed throughout the years?
Ooh, good question.
Very.
I don't know. I think, but when you're talking, I'm thinking, God, how am I going to answer that? I think about like whenever I do training for oral history for groups of interviews who haven't done interviewing before, I think like the things that I think about is I always really want to encourage people to be thinking researchers and not just interviewers. And I think if you're working together in a collaborative way where you're going to work with members of the community as interviewers, don't just think of them as the people who are going to ask the questions. Think about them as thinking researchers who will contribute their ideas to your project in terms of which are the best questions to ask, how do we design the project, and you will have ideas around interpretation. And there's a series of handouts that I've adapted and used over time, and there's one called Questions to Elicit Meaning. And that's the one in a workshop that I always like do a little dance around it, because that's what you want to encourage your interviewers to have that skill to be able to ask the tell me more questions. Why did you do that? How do you feel about that? Do you think your mum would have done that as well? It's like the questions, all of those like follow-up questions which go beyond description of what happened towards the meaning and what something meant to somebody, because that's the critical skill for anybody doing this kind of work. We don't need descriptions, similar descriptions of things that happened in a factual way. We want to know how your grandma felt about the Liberation Day and what she remembered, what was important to her. How is that different to your grandma, or how is that different to somebody in this place, or looking at it from outside? It's that like, we have the history books full of the facts of what happened. The oral history is to give us the meaning in relation to what it meant to other people. So I think that's what I would try to encourage and empower in other people I'm supporting to be interviewers. Should we have a little stand up and wiggle about?
Energizer?
Yeah, just a little, yeah.
Yeah. So, and then
I like this one then, after the movement, because I used to do Qigong. Has anyone heard of Qigong? It's like a martial art. So you take on the horse stance, yeah, which is like nice and grounding. And then you take your hands here, and our hands really good. Like, you sort of like imagine it's a balloon, and you breathe in. And then you breathe out slowly. Should you do it 3 times? We're all really calm horses. Okay. Please be patient with me as I move between my slides, the notes that I can see there, and a bit of paper. I'd love to be able to remember everything, but I can't.
we appreciate your self-care.
So, Sometimes I used to use the word participatory a lot to describe the work I do, and I'm fine with that term, but I think it comes with a lot of, I think it's quite hard to achieve true participation if we're true to the meaning of it. So I have found myself, not necessarily intentionally, moving towards using the term collaboration and collaborative to describe the work. It feels a little bit more honest. I think it is important to be careful when we use these words like participatory, co-production, co-creation, collaboration. They're all very stretchy, and there is a risk that we can use them falsely to describe the work we do. But if we think about that stretch in a good way, there are ways of working which should stretch us. So that's my positive spin on this sort of stretchiness of these terms. I like collaboration just for its simple idea that it's about people coming together to work on something. I chosen the word praxis, which feels a little bit like, to me, like that's a bit academic. But I think it describes, it's better than practice. I think practice is something that we do and we may repeat, and it's a way of doing things, whereas I think praxis has that notion of reflection, which I think is sort of foundational to good collaborative working. And so I think praxis, for those of us who might be doing research and thinking critically about what we do, so a lot of what we do is praxis. We are doing things, but we're thinking about and reflecting those doing things and bringing our kind of wider theories into that doing. But we're also reflecting on, because some of our theoretical thinking is in the doing. And there's a book I really love by Bell Hooks, From the Margins to the Centre, Feminist Theory. What's the full title? From the Margins to the Centre, Feminist Theory. And I think Sarah, if any of you are familiar with Sarah Ahmed, who I love as well so dearly, she shows us that we can find our theory in our lives, I think. And at the moment, have quite an intense friendship with Joyce, who's a 94-year-old neighbour, who I am spending a lot of time with, both as a friend and a carer, and I feel like that's what's happening. I'm learning so much about what care means and all its complications, not from reading academically about it, but from interacting with Joyce and thinking about when I step over a line and take away her independence, when I give her independence. So I think praxis sort of holds that idea that we can learn from our doing. And I haven't read all of Pedagogy of the Oppressed, I probably should, but what I like about it, and I like seeing that you can see in Bell Hooks' writing, you can see how she's influenced by Paulo Freire, and also one of the key thinkers in participatory research is informed by Paulo Freire as well. So I think these, I like these. So, why do I think we need to talk about it? So we can't really do oral history without collaborating with other people, and it's a practice or a method. I think if you compare it to doing surveys, it does require us to engage deeply with others, and that in doing so there is a responsibility to do so thoughtfully and with care. I think collaboration is sometimes something that is assumed. It's not always recognised or interrogated, because we can sometimes think that it relates to a set of soft skills about being nice to people, and it's sort of something that just happens. We don't necessarily scrutinise it. I don't know if anybody gets. Do you get the Oral History Journal yet, or not? For the UK one. I'll see if I can get one to send you. So the latest issue, the spring 2024 issue, is called Revisiting Shared Authority, so quite relevant to this topic. And in the beginning of that, the editors, Olson and Turabi, they state that the creation of all academic knowledge, not only oral history-based knowledge, is a collaborative process, is often forgotten, because in academia, the myth of the lone intellectual genius is still very much alive. And I also think that many of the key ingredients of good collaboration can relate to tasks that might be seen as administrative, In my university in Newcastle, we have academic staff and professional services staff, and you can imagine how the hierarchy works, and which are mainly women, etc. So I think like a lot of good collaboration is around communication, good project management, it might be around your budgeting, and those are the things that we don't necessarily value as academics. So that's another reason why we don't necessarily want to talk about it as much. And it takes time and resources to do it well, and that's why I think we need to talk about it more, because we need to be able to justify those in our project design and our budgets. If we don't talk about it and we let it be assumed, we're not going to get it properly. We're not going to get the resources we need to do it properly. And somewhere along the line, either you're going to end up doing loads of overtime, or we're going to be expecting poor members of communities who might be poorer than us to participate in our projects as partners for free. And I think that's potentially problematic. I think the other reason I want to talk about it is because it can be really joyful. On my LinkedIn page, I do describe myself as happiest when collaborating with others, because it's true. Life is better when you're doing it with other people, when you're working with other people, and it is difficult. Collaboration can be complicated, but we should also kind of acknowledge the joy in it. As Hooks says, we all long for loving community. It enhances life's joy. And I wanted to share this with you. This is from a poetry book by Selena Godden called Pessimism is for Lightweights. And it's 30, Pessimism is for Lightweights, 13 Pieces of Courage and Resistance by Selena Godden. And actually the poetry book came with a poster, but this one is my favourite. I love that idea that hope is a group project. So I guess just to get us thinking more about what we mean by collaboration, it's good to talk about who we collaborate with. And so I'm just sharing a few ideas here, but do think about it in relation to your own work. I think, I would always prioritise the collaboration with diverse interviewees or the communities that we're working with, but we are also collaborating often with civil society organisations. We might be collaborating with people across disciplines. If we think about extending collaboration to our audiences and to publics, that might make us think differently about how we do that communication. Have a think about whether there's anybody else we would add to that list. And then we can think about where and when do we collaborate? Is that in our institutes? Here we are today, collaborating, on collaboration. Sometimes it might be at the community itself, outside of our institutes. And as I showed with that latest example of the work, it can be remotely. And there is, I wrote a chapter on that experience of working, the sort of collaboration, remote collaboration in Vietnam, which is called like doing and learning oral history at a distance, and focusing really on how we collaborated, recognising the distances in that collaboration. So they weren't just distances of geography, there were also distances of discipline, there were differences of culture, there was distances of hierarchy, etc. And I think we can think about breaking down the different parts of a project or initiative might force us to think more in a more nuanced and critical way about collaboration. Can we involve community members in setting the research agenda? That can be really difficult, and I think we should be honest about the extent of our collaboration. It's not possible to make things, as I said, as participatory as we might like to in an ideal world, but we can see our work as moving towards something which is more equitable in terms of how the power is shared in a project. Obviously the method we choose are part of that, like we do think of oral history as a method which shares more, which is enables our interviewees or research participants to have greater control in terms of the information and the knowledge that's generated. But how can we collaborate in other phases of our work? And we can think about how we collaborate. If we think about the time that's required, like I said earlier, I think we should collaborate with patience and respect. We can collaborate with love and joy. More practically, regular and appropriate communication is really important. And remembering that collaboration will work differently in different places with different people and at different times. So our collaboration isn't simply like a set of tools or a way of things we can design into a project. It is a broader ethos which can be responsive and agile and open to those contexts that we find ourselves in. But generally we want to be able to foster an environment where people feel the people you're working with can disagree with you and speak up. We can think about opportunities where we can co-author. Again, I could go back to this idea of the lone genius, like there's such a emphasis on authorship and writing, but how can we kind of do that differently? How can we bring the people we're collaborating into that process as well? And so I think collaboration is, but it's also more than something we can design into a project. So we can think about using participatory photography, or we can think about working with a team of interviewers as peer researchers. We might think about more interactive outputs and activities based on our communication. So there are definitely things that we can design in which enhance the collaboration within our projects. But it's also more than that. I think it's an orientation. I think it's a critical ethos in that it's a way of being, a way of doing, and a way of knowing that will inform what we think counts as knowledge, what methods we use, how we work with others, and how we choose to communicate our research. So these are the three things which are important to me, three ways of working that I think in terms of my practice today as a feminist researcher and oral historian, I'm drawing on these three areas, and I think scholarship and practice in each of these areas has a lot to say about collaboration. I've talked quite a bit about participatory research. It's Robert Chambers, who I encountered in my undergraduate days, which was a long time ago, 1991. And on our syllabus was a book called Putting the Last First by Robert Chambers. And the book was on sale for £5 or something. He managed to make this book also accessible to poor students. And so he's really sort of championed this idea of participatory research in the context of development and kind of really trying to kind of play with that idea of what counts as knowledge. But also if we think about the international NGO sector today, so not just in academia, but in the sector, there is a lot of talk around shifting power. There's a lot of talk around decolonial approaches. I tend to not use that word because I don't think as a white woman I should be saying I'm doing anything decolonial, because it's quite revolutionary. If somebody wants to describe the way I work as moving towards that, that's one thing, but it's not something I choose to claim. And yeah, if we look at that, all that work at the moment on representation and ethical image making, it's also like moving as well to being more deliberately anti-racist in its approach. And in terms of the shifting power agenda, we're talking about how do we move from, the idea of an NGO based in the UK is not really viable anymore, and we should be looking at other ways to shift resources and power. So if we move to thinking about oral history, are you familiar with this term? Have you come across this term, shared authority, in your reading and writing around oral history?
Yeah.
Because I would say this is what oral historians love to talk about, this phrase. I think it's one of those things that it's just neat, right? That's why we like it. So I think it's from Michael Frisch wrote a book in 1990 called A Shared Authority, Essays on the Craft and Meaning of Oral History and Public History. But then, since then, we see oral historians also, oral historians? Did I just join the two words? Oral historians talking about sharing authority. And then Michael Frisch, more recently, tries to sort of explain that he was talking about how he thinks shared authority is just something that is. It's like oral history, by definition, there is shared authority in it, in terms of what's going on in the interview, how different audiences might interpret it. It is the authority around what counts as knowledge and whatever is shared. Whereas you have Stephen High, has anybody heard of Stephen High? He runs that centre in Concordia University. Do you know him? And the Montreal Project, do you know about that, Jessica?
No.
Okay, it's good to look up the Concordia Project, I'll find it. About sharing authority, and I guess then that's oral history and sort of seeing this as more of a doing thing, something you kind of would aspire to in your work. And I think we find within oral history a lot of reflection and writing about the interview. And obviously that's because for most oral historians, it's such an important moment, right? So people write about it a lot and reflect on it and the relationships and the intersubjectivity and the power that's going on. And there's so much of that written by feminist oral historians. If you haven't managed to get hold of this book, I love this book. It's lots of quite short chapters by women using oral history and related methods all around the world. And Linda Shops, in it, she talks about, she says, why is it that male scholars and a small group of male scholars, like Michael Frisch, in particular, are we recording this? Are cited more consistently than feminists? So I think that reminds us that citation does equal power, and we can shift that. All of us in this room have the power to think about who we cite in our work and make the time to look up other people, women of colour who are writing about oral history or related work. And so I think feminist research and much oral history share similar roots, and there's a long tradition, as we said, of feminist oral history. So that book, Beyond Women's Words, is a response to, it's sort of like a follow-on to a book in 1970 by Gluck, which I think was Writing Women's Words. And that thinking continues to shape and inform oral history. And we can see that many oral history projects share similar ambitions as feminist research, in that they aim to challenge hierarchies, raise previously unheard voices, and challenge the status quo. And feminist research asks us to let go of the false idea that we're the all-knowing authority. It seeks to uncover and disrupt and challenge systems of inequality. It's aware of the impact of power on the research process. As we said, there's a lot of focus on understanding that power in the interview moment. And it challenges the idea of some of these traditional hierarchies of the means of knowledge production within our teams of researchers, within the methods we use, and about how we represent data. And I really like this book as a sort of an introduction. It's quite it's quite a nice practical sort of toolkit book with lots of sort of activities and ideas for learning in it. And I think another thing, just before we move on to that, which is obviously kind of central to feminist research, is this idea of reflexivity and reflecting on our own positionality and power within the research. So I think if we're talking about collaboration, it's important to talk about power. Who has it, who doesn't, who has less and who has more within those spaces of collaboration. And that may be different in terms of the geographies of our collaboration. So if we invite people into our space, they may feel like they have less power in that moment. And so perhaps if you want to involve people in designing a research project around their community and the history, where you choose to have that discussion might impact on how the power is shared or felt in that moment of collaboration. And I guess we want to make sure that our collaboration does not replicate existing power inequalities, but instead aims to be transformative and move towards social justice. And so, and as part of that, like I said, I've always felt that self-critique should be baked into the way that we practice participation and collaboration. And this willingness to be reflexive and be critical of our own practice, however uncomfortable that might be, is really important. And I'm using critical here in that feminist sense that it's about kind of analysing and moving forwards towards something better. And I think if you can't reflect on your own position and power and consider how that might be impacting on the work you're doing and the relationships of the people you're working with, I don't think you can be claimed to be working in a participatory way, or the type of collaboration that I'm proposing here. So working collaboratively requires reflexivity and power sharing, recognising our position and seeking ways to decenter ourselves. And as we said, it will be work differently at different times with different people. And I think, I don't know how many of you yet have like facilitated workshops with other people. I think like collaboration, facilitation, teaching, these are all such rich sites of learning for us because they're not static. They're always changing. The unexpected can happen. When you bring a group of people together, you don't know what's going to happen, right? And it's always going to be different. So that means we always have something to learn from it. It's a rich and dynamic, those collaborative spaces are rich sites for honing and improving the way we work. But, gone the wrong way, sorry. How do we do this within a hierarchical organisation? And I think there is, you may be familiar with it, I think there's an increasing appetite in academia for more engagement with civil society, more collaborations, more relationships with the outside world. And we talk about that as engagement, some of what people claim in terms of impact relates to that work. But the structure and processes of academia have not really caught up with that enthusiasm, I don't think. So we still are working in these structures that celebrate the individual researcher. Hierarchy is extremely evident. There is prestige related to knowledge and publications as opposed to collaboration. And so none of that is really screaming good collaboration to me. And so a lot of the work that I think is required of good collaboration, the communications, the project management, the non-hierarchical ways of working, taking time to develop teams, these things are frequently unseen by academia. And I think that's why it's so important that we talk about it, even if we all know it, to kind of raise its status. And yeah, those of you, you seem to be familiar with Sarah Ahmed's work, and I really like her writing in Living a Feminist Life about how people with power say something as an excuse for not doing it. So they will say they have diversity in organisation, and by saying it, they think they're doing it. So I've been in a research project when we've been asked to fill in an equality, diversity and inclusion survey, and it's almost as if like that is doing the diversity work, that counts as doing it. So we kind of say it to hide the fact we're actually not doing it. And so I think the challenge of doing collaboration within the hierarchy is that if someone in power says, we're doing co-production is happening in our work, it's very difficult for someone with less power to question that. And because once we start to talk about something as a problem, or question and critique something that somebody in power is saying, we become the problem. That's what Ahmed talks about. And that, to me, is one of the dangers we need to be aware of when we are trying to practice collaborative working within the hierarchy. And so I think this goes back to what we were saying earlier. A lot of the writing around oral history and power centres on the interview encounter, maybe what happens to the interview afterwards in relation to our interpretation of it, and to the archiving, but I think we should also look beyond the interview to what's happening around the interview, and thinking about the structures of the institutions that we work within and some of the norms and rules of those. So thinking about project management and maybe even policies and forms that we have to fill in order to make things happen. Last year I arranged 2 seminars on oral history and activism and invited women outside of the academy, women of colour, to come and talk about their work, either in oral history or activism. And those things, it's often assumed that people will want to do that for free. And so when you want to challenge that and work more equitably and pay those experts outside the academy to contribute their expertise into the academy, their system doesn't really want you to do that, and you will find yourself spending a lot of administrative time. As I was saying, good collaboration often equals attention to detail in terms of the administration you have to perform. So that's where I think Ahmed refers to the wall, doesn't she, as well? I think sometimes in academia, when you want to do collaboration, you hit walls of some of the policies and ways of doing things, making that difficult. So this is where I come to feminist leadership and dreaming of feminist leadership. Some of you may have heard of, if you haven't, look her up, Sulata Batliwala, who founded an organisation based in India called Kriya. And there's a nice, I think there's, I can share it, there's a YouTube video of her talking about feminist leadership, which is a nice introduction. And feminists are working to reconceptualise power, an understanding of power and leadership that is actually much closer to the work we, as oral historians, are trying to do. And so this is thinking about power as energy, strength, effective interaction, but a form of leadership which is about sharing power and creating spaces for others to make change. So all that we've been talking about in relation to collaboration. Feminist leadership cannot be individualistic. It is collaborative and collective. But it also recognises that we cannot transform the world without transforming ourselves. So then we go back to the need to be self-reflexive about our actions and our encounters. And so I wonder whether we should define participation and collaboration in a similar way, as a way of working which seeks to address societal and institutional power inequalities and strives not to replicate them within our work. And have you read The Master's Tools Will Never Dismantle the Master's House by Audre Lorde? So again, I think it's free online. It's a short essay, but essentially, I guess what she's saying is if we want to change the status quo, we can't use it. We can't do that using the same. We need different tools. We need different ways of doing that if we really want to change it.
Can we have a bit of a debate here?
Yes?
I think this is a big topic of debate. The master tools will never be able to bring true change. So this is like the systemic change that we all want to bring about, I guess. And like this idea that systems don't have a face. So how do you change a system? Let's say, and I don't know, for a long time I think like this. I am innately thinking like this, having a little bit of a rebellion, but recently, I don't know, I think in Armenian we have a saying like Kalaya Merita Brunda, which means the castle can only be taken by the inside.
Yeah,
so like that just brings another level to it, and I don't know what to think about this anymore.
I think you're right. Sometimes we say that to change the game, you've got to play the game.
Yeah.
Or I think I think about it sometimes in terms of, when we're at school and we're learning English. In the UK, you have to write properly in proper sentences with proper grammar. But then, you're also being given this amazing book by David Armand to read, where he's breaking all the rules, and there are no full stops and everything. And so this is the idea that but maybe we have to play the rules a little bit, and then we can break them. I don't know.
But I mean, even in that sense, there's this really good book. It's called Shuggy Bane, and it's from the Scottish author. And the entire book is written in English, but the way that the Scots speak English. So it's not for example, the way that we're speaking. It's for example, they use their own words for certain phrases. They use still terms from Gaelic that they put into English. But I think that when it comes to you can't cause change, with the same tools. It kind of it can also be argued, I think, that those tools were created to upkeep something, not necessarily. I think you have to be we have to really play the system in the sense to turn its own tools against it.
Yeah.
But I think if it's a system that's survived for this long, then those tools are very difficult to turn on their own masters, basically. But I think, especially now, with social, for example, with the pro-Palestine movement, a lot of people are using the algorithms that are kind of designed to sort of hide certain videos, and they're oh yeah, but you kind of shot yourself in the foot here because I can just write stupid comments on this video and somebody else will see it, or I can tag people in these videos and somebody will see it, and it's it's interesting to think that we're kind of getting there, I think, but it's still a long way to go because we're kind of people that are being elected right now are kind of
I think you're right, definitely right question. I just like her writing. No. And I think there's something inspirational in it. That makes me think differently.
Definitely. I just come from when I want to raise this debate, it's because especially in Pristina, there's a lot of debate about between my crew, let's say researchers, cultural workers, that we work with the institutions, and at the same time we see these really strict hierarchies, and then you have the urge to say this, a lot of my colleagues are boycott. Very, and I feel the same. I always say, I will never work for the state, but then how can you change the state if you don't work for the state, and this is what you're saying, I think is super correct, tweaks or, shift the narrative. For example, in the 80s, Black is Beautiful was the shift. It changed the perception, from an activist perspective. But anyways, thank you for the debate.
I think, and I'm literally really close, really near the end, and try to kind of address a bit of that, I guess. But I think, but the ideas and thinking around feminist leadership are a place for me to learn more about how to collaborate better, and a lot of that thinking is informed by Black feminism, and I think if you go back and read the Cohambi River Statement, written in 74, is it, or something? I mean, yeah, there's a lot to get from that. There's a lot of, I think, for me, like trying to learn more and think about what it means to be oppressed and how we should work with people who are oppressed, how we should position ourselves in relation to those individuals. I think Black feminism has a huge amount to teach us about how we think about that, in terms of all its thinking in relation to how, class, race, age, and other things intersect. I think we know that ActionAid have adopted these feminist leadership principles. ActionAid is a huge international organisation. I think that's really exciting and suggests that it's something that we can maybe work towards. But as you say, in the meantime, that's Newcastle University is not going to transform itself into a feminist-led organisation. So I think in the meantime, we need to be attentive to power. We need to be ready to be led by others. We need to be accountable. And we need to listen, care, practice maintenance, which is some of that not exciting celebrated bits of the work, and practice our collaboration with love and joy. And I think there are things we can practice wherever we find ourselves in the hierarchy or the rigid organisation, in whatever position we are. We can think about our communication being accessible, regular and respectful. We can be open and flexible and create spaces where people feel they can contribute and be critical. We can share the platforms we do have, whether those are internally or externally. And this is a big one for me that I'd like to write more about, and it's around careful budgeting that accounts for everyone's time and expertise. And we can also think about, even as junior people, we can think about suggesting ways that meetings should be run, where we share agendas in advance, we rotate chairs, we take minutes, we make those accountable and more collaborative spaces. And this is the stuff that is often unseen, undervalued, and not resourced. So I think it's our responsibility to talk about these things, speak this work, value this work, so we can get resources for that. Because when we do that, we are demonstrating through our good collaboration different ways of thinking about power and leadership that are most closely aligned to the social justice work that many of us are engaged with.